Thank you for continuing to stay with us. We are encouraging our viewers to send in questions, comments, use the hashtag #TheExplainer, at Citizen TV Kenya, at Yvonne Okwara. Any questions that you have for the Acting Commissioner General, we will pose those to her. I'm seeing a few of those already, so please keep them coming as we carry on with our conversation tonight. Rispah, let me begin with the tough task ahead of you, which is, collecting revenue through taxes. Obviously, considering the circumstances the country finds itself in, this is a high-pressure situation. The president, in fact, himself has said on more than one occasion that we are collecting below target. We're capable of collecting much more, even under the current circumstances, without the Finance Act that is still located in Parliament. So, my question to you is, where are the gaps? Why aren't we collecting as much as we should?
Yvonne, I'll answer your question probably directly and indirectly, but I think targeted the same end game. That one, truth be told, one fact that it's been a challenging year. The results will speak for themselves and as and when we release them, so we'll leave that for now. But as it is, perhaps maybe previously there was that understanding or misconception that maybe we were doing at 50%, 60%, but I would tell you it's much higher than that. The president is right, and he has said it on many occasions.
He actually called it lackluster last month when he was filing his returns.
Yes, and that was specifically on the 26th of May, 2023, when he visited us, and he filed his returns at Times Tower. What he has continued to encourage, not just us, but everybody, is that everybody must pay their fair share of taxes. One, the government doesn't have taxes, revenue of its own. The government needs to run. The government needs to offer services. So we're talking about service delivery. And service delivery by the government then relies largely on our taxes. So that means, again, a civic duty upon us, each and every one of us, to pay our taxes. Now, the challenge the president has given us is more of automation of the processes. Now, as it is, KRA taxes are collected, but then they are not collected manually. So if you're paying your POI, your corporation tax, you will not come to KRA and hand over the cash. So what you'll do, you'll pay through your bank, you'll generate an iTax, PRN, etc., but it's automated. That does not mean we cannot do more, because what has come to the fore is that with automation, then there is improvement in our service delivery and even an increment in the taxes. And I will throw in a couple of examples there. President has challenged us. Why can't we then not collect taxes at source? For agency taxes, for example, PAYE, withholding tax, excess tax, why do we have to wait for the recipient to receive, then we wait for them to self-declare? Why can't we nip it in the bud, collect it up front, and that way then it reduces even the back and forth and the challenges of you owe this, you don't.
PAYE?
So when I talk about agency taxes, I'm talking about taxes where someone is collecting on behalf of government.
Okay.
So PAYE, withholding tax, excess, name it. Now, some of the things that we have put in place, again, just to try and close those gaps, and even that shift of now you owe, you don't owe, I don't owe, and then causing tax disputes, is how can we then collect at source? So we've integrated with a number of entities. So case in point, the betting sector. We've integrated with them. So start with integration. And just to explain how then we can refine and build efficiencies in our revenue collection and seal any potential loopholes. So integration. 2, e-TIMS for VAT. We've had very many cases. You see, VAT, again, an agency tax where each and everyone, even a small child, pays VAT as long as whatever they are consuming is not exempt. So question is then, why should VAT not be performing? So what we've put in place, again, TIMS, e-TIMS, where it is connected directly from a supplier. As you're paying, as you're buying, whatever you're buying, the VAT is remitted directly to KRA, real-time or near real-time. So generally what I'm saying is there's automation, there's technology, there's tax-based expansion. We know that as it is, and looking at our population, I think most of us think we can do more, because then what we have is probably a few paying the taxes. But now, as we expand our tax base, and what we're driving, the tax base expansion agenda, we'll have more people coming into the bracket, and then, of course, then the pressure reduces on a number of them.
Rispah, we've been talking about expanding the tax base for quite a number of years now. And for some Kenyans, it would feel like we just go for the easy targets. So those are the pay slip, that's where you go and you rate that, those with businesses that you already know. So when we talk about expanding the tax base, you know, where are we looking to collect taxes from that are not already collecting, you know, that are not already paying taxes? Because it would seem like you load on taxes onto the ones who are already paying taxes. Either you increase the amount of taxes, and this is year on year with every Finance Act that comes, you know, into being and into law, that target the same old people. You know them, and that's where you go to for more and more money, as opposed to this, it's now becoming proverbial, expanding that tax base.
That is a complaint that we've had over and over, year in, year out. We have put it as part of our agenda and our policy that we need to expand, bring in more taxpayers into the bracket, and not just bringing you in to tick a box because we've onboarded, but bringing also active taxpayers into the bracket. In the last year, year ending 2022-2023, we onboarded new taxpayers, new active taxpayers, about 941,000. That might seem a small or big number depending on where you are, but what we know, and we've been challenged actually, is that we can do more. Now, let me throw in a little bit of statistics and the way we are structured. Now, from the domestic tax perspective, now you have the large taxpayers office, and that covers both whether it's domestic taxes or customs. Large taxpayers office, or large taxpayers, who account the composition of our taxpayers about 0.02%, but they contribute 56%. Then you have the public sector division, so public entities, again, constituting 0.02%, but contributing 19%. Then you have the medium taxpayers office, medium taxpayers rather, 0.05%, contributing 10% of the taxes. Now, million-dollar question, where is the balance? The balance actually sits with MSMEs. They're just about, the constitution is just about 99%, but the contribution is about 15%. Now, there was a KNBS MSME survey that was carried out about 2016, and what it reported was that we have just an average of about 7.4 million MSMEs. Yeah. MSMEs employ 15 million individuals, and this one's contribution to GDP is 44%. So you see, there's that contribution to GDP of 44%, but then when it comes to tax revenue, it's 15%. So to answer your question, Yvonne, I think we can do more in that space. So bring more people into the bracket, focusing on not the brick and mortar, the traditional one that we're used to, but more going into this space that is, to some extent, uncharted, and bring more into the bracket.
But for that, it would require the formalization aspect of it, which is also another huge conversation about whether they're receiving enough services, even as the businesses they run, in order to then pay the taxes. You know, sort of, which comes first?
Yes, we've had, again, the question that what's in it for me?
Yes.
So what's in it for you? I mean, facilitation, government facilities, services, roads, lighting, you know, a lot is in it for you. Now, we work very closely with the MSME sector. They have very good groupings or associations. We engage with them in terms of talking to them about just creating tax awareness, tax education, reminding them that what's in it for you, it's bigger than you as an individual, but more about country. So as you pay the taxes, then you have the right to demand for lighting. You have the right to demand for roads, you know, as a taxpayer.
There's a big conversation about the ones who do pay the taxes, who do not see the benefit of it. That may not sit within your realm because you collect the taxes, but there's also the issue of tax efficiency, right? Like, you know, you pay the money and you see it working for you. We'll get to many questions that are coming in a moment, but I wanted to talk about the other gaps that would be seen in, you know, revenue collection. And this would be with regards to corruption, and this would be within KRA itself. Rispah, there's a general perception correct me if I'm wrong, that KRA staff are corrupt. Do you believe KRA has the right reputation to be able to collect the taxes? And I'll tell you why. The president himself even said that the staff are sabotaging the rollout of technology. We've seen countless cases that are conducted by the EACC of, KRA staff who own far more than a wealth declaration exercise would be able to account for. And so the question that I have for you is, does KRA have the right reputation to be able to collect taxes?
Does KRA have the right reputation? My answer is that we can do better. The perception is there, and in some instances, we cannot distance ourselves from it. Corruption, when you look at KRA, first we sell a very difficult product. Tax collection. A tough product, someone has to do it. Yes, the president pronounced himself about the frustration that continues to exist in automating our services, and as such then creating those havens for rent seeking. Now, what has happened is, looking at KRA as an institution, I would actually rightly say that not everybody is corrupt. And like every other institution or every other family, we would have some bad apples amongst us. What we have done as KRA, even to deal with this perception, is that try and drive the right narrative, but not just by talking. What then can we go out of our way to do so that then we practice what we preach? We do know that sometimes, you'd have probably 80% doing the right thing, or 85%, and a few others doing something different, but the tendency would be to dwell on the negativity. So yes, we are trying to automate our process, again, to deal with that issue, but also on the aspect of corruption, I want to just answer your questions directly, is that KRA is also doing a lot to deal with that. Where people have been, where the allegations have been proven, we have taken very stern and decisive action at different levels, bringing in even other government agencies to support us, to help us, to facilitate us, so that then we drive the right narrative and we drive a very strong message of what then is intended and what we need to do.
So what are some of those internal mechanisms that you have employed, automation aside?
Automation
to curb corruption, is there a wealth declaration, for instance, yes, of your staff? Because now we also hear of intelligence officers who are playing a big role in operations across various parts of or departments of KRA. So perhaps you can tell us what are some of the tangible things that you're doing to fight corruption within KRA.
So one, wealth declaration, as you rightly said, just like every other government entity, every 2 years we do that.
All staff?
All staff without exception, from the top to the bottom. Everybody does that. Then secondly, we also carry out integrity testing. So
tell us about that.
So integrity testing, basically, as you're looking at that and even looking at lifestyle audits, what then do you have? How do you live your life compared then to what you earn? Now, that is done by a very special group. One of the departments that deals with that. At integrity testing, one would show up, like every other taxpayer, to see, just to carry out a quick test. How will I be served by this KRA officer at whatever level? Whether you're talking about points of entry, whether you're talking at our respective offices. If I come to you for a service that is free, will you charge me or will you demand money from me? We have cases where staff have actually been found culpable. We have a system called iWhistle. It might please you to know, Yvonne. We have a system that we've put in place called iWhistle. iWhistle is a system where we have encouraged taxpayers to anonymously report tax malpractices, whether it is another taxpayer engaging in malpractices or our own staff. Now, this one is anonymous, and of course, there's a small reward depending on what then we're able to recover. But more importantly is around our staff, that even as we're looking at the tax gaps, then on our staff, we've asked staff to step aside, even as investigations are carried out. And when you're cleared, then you're onboarded. If you're not, we separate.
Okay. Wealth declaration forms in this country, we've seen with other officials. You write, I own and I am worth. And those papers go and sit somewhere for a couple of years and they gather dust. and not much happens with them. So you're saying every 2 years, what happens with those declaration forms? Where do they go? Are they checked every year? You know, every 2 years, like you say?
Yeah.
You know, those have been, for lack of a better word, just a declaration that is on paper.
Right.
So maybe something is done with that after 2 years. If you cannot explain your wealth or how it has grown since, what happens?
So we have this department actually that deals with intelligence and strategic operations, and also coupled with investigations and enforcement. So that is the one that even does largely the integrity testing, the lifestyle audits. They're responsible for the eye whistle. And all that, you see, when you're looking at our staff, for example, at an individual, you're looking at them with a 300 degree. So there is what is declared, yes. These ones are handled then actually channeled to the EACC through our HR. But again, they all find their way to EACC. And of course, as a different institution, then it carries its own separate and independent checks, even as we do our own internally.
All right, let's talk about the tax regime in the country. Businesses, and we report that here week after week, complaining of the tax regime, saying they want a more predictable tax environment. There's a frequent introduction of new taxes, and that the taxation policy shouldn't just be about collecting more revenue. In fact, that leads me to one message here on Twitter from Wamboy. JL says, thanks to the myriad of charges and expenses of running our business, our MSMEs shut down. There has to be more understanding of the difficult environment most are doing business in before talking about growing the tax base. Businesses complain about this. Manufacturers complain about this. The private sector complains about what can be an unpredictable environment. And this is a complaint that has been on, again, for years, if not decades. What are you doing, you know, to rectify this?
We do appreciate actually the comments and the well said that an unpredictable environment, then it's not just about our economy, but also investors. So what are we doing about it? We have been having our conversation, our parent ministry, the National Treasury, to talk about the national tax policy. You see, a national tax policy then would be the framework that puts, you know, a framework that puts in place the direction that we should go, predictability of taxes, what you should anticipate. And that way then, I believe, would welcome more investors, because when you have a more predictable environment, then tax should be the last thing that you should worry about, because you already have ticked that box. So there are various other things, of course, other measures that the government is putting in place, licenses, etc., basically starting up businesses, putting businesses in place, but that's not for me to discuss, but more about having a national tax policy. I appreciate it is a conversation that we've been having
for quite some time.
Yeah. And
how do we not have a policy after all these years, that national tax policy?
Different things have happened at different levels. In some instances that you'd believe that you've actually put something in place that then would create the predictability. But of course, you know, it also needs stakeholder engagement at different levels at grassroots. What do taxpayers then want
Surely,
to
Rispah,
see?
We've been engaging for very many years.
We have. And now we are actually on the...
How long does it take to engage?
I'll tell you one thing, Yvonne. It may have taken long, but we're on the tail end of actually putting it in place. And one thing we've noted is that increasing taxes does not necessarily then lead to higher revenue mobilization. So that reality then is there. Taxes can only be elastic to a certain point. So clearly that reality check is there, looking at our economy and hoping, even as we're looking forward probably to a double-digit growth in the coming year, then certain hard decisions have to be made, and that is one of them.
Yeah, and now that you've talked about increasing taxes and how that works, because our viewers and many of us are not economists, but there is a question about increasing taxes, and that not necessarily leading to more collections. That you would then have people either finding ways to evade it, avoid it, not pay it altogether, or you would then have businesses that collapse literally under the weight, you know, of the taxes. For instance, with the you know, the capital gains tax that was tripled, then just right after that, we saw a reduction in the amount of collection. Was it by about 13%? So Kenyans ask, you continue to tax and add more taxes, but from who and from what type of economy? I wonder what your thoughts are on just that question of increasing taxes, but that not necessarily meaning more collection.
So increasing taxes on its own does not necessarily mean more collection. but a lot more has to be done around that. And it goes back, revolves around the same questions you've asked. How do we curb corruption? How do we plug the gaps? And you see, even when you're talking about corruption, it takes two to tango. So it means there's a willing buyer, willing seller, you know, loosely and largely put. But then there are so many other things that come with it. And when you're talking about building efficiencies, it's not just about how you fashion something, but comes back to the aspect of automation. So now, you've talked about CGT. Of course, talking about the Finance Act now is sub judice because it's before the Court of Law.
Yeah, but this was before this Finance Act of 2023.
Yes.
This is not. Yes, this is not to do with what is currently in court.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we have seen, again, like you're saying about capital gains tax, if you look at the East Africa region, yeah, and just let's draw comparison. Sometimes, you know, we talk without appreciating the facts around us and in the region. Kenya started with a very low rate, 5%. If you go to our neighbors, Tanzania and Uganda, they're at 30%. So worlds apart, but I'll tell you it is working. So it's just that bit of reaction of taxes have been increased, Finance Act is here, it means more taxes. But one thing also I would challenge probably our taxpayers to look at is also where the taxes are reduced, because it's not always that the taxes are always going up. In some instances, actually, taxes are reduced. There's always
like when were taxes reduced?
I think you'll see that in the Finance Act, and I choose not to dwell on it.
Okay, so we haven't had that before.
We have. Like, take an example of, okay, that of course was forced by circumstances. Take an example of the COVID time.
Yeah, but that was a relief due to that was a very big catastrophic event, and stimulus was required at the time.
Yvonne, it was. But I'll tell you one thing.
Because to be honest, we're not even collecting
You'll be surprised.
As much taxes. No, without the reliefs, businesses had shut down, people had lost jobs. Or did we have higher tax collections during the pandemic?
We actually did 108% in that year.
And what was that due to?
More of building it. Reliefs were given. Tax rates came down.
Yeah.
So basically you have people being cushioned and having more in their pockets, but more of building efficiencies. Okay. So that is one year.
So that does make, the argument that higher taxes do not equal.
Yes, but that's why I'm telling you to look at it both ways. Yeah. That even reduction may not necessarily mean that, but it's more of what else is being done.
But we've seen reduction leading to an increase.
Yes. So the interesting is that you're dwelling in that.
No, I'm dwelling on the positives that you asked me to dwell on, which is you have tax relief.
Correct.
And you end up collecting 100%, 108%, like you said, of your target.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah. So it's more of whether you increase or reduce, it's more about what else is being done, apart from just moving a number from 10 to 15. Yeah. Or moving it from 30 to 20. Yeah. So it's more of what else are we doing? And that's why we have challenged ourselves as KRA. We have been challenged by the topmost office of the country. What are you doing differently? Because then, if you keep doing the same thing and you're getting the same results, or not the results that are intended, then it means you have to go back to the
So what are you doing differently, aside from automation?
So aside from automation, I talked about tax base, I talked about improving or increasing tax knowledge and tax awareness right from the grassroots level. What do I mean by that? We have upped our game on ushuru, what we call ushuru mashinani. By ushuru mashinani, it's not just about a conversation that happens in Times Tower or Nairobi, the city. What are we doing out there, using our people, going out there to speak even in vernacular about tax? We have introduced tax clubs, over 1,000 tax clubs in different high schools. We have worked with KICD, Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, to introduce taxes right from grade 4. All the way up. So apart from that, then it's more about hopefully working with our taxpayers as partners to appreciate the bigger picture of why taxes are collected. As I said earlier, not an easy product to sell, but it has to be done. Someone has to do it.
Okay. In December last year, President Ruto asked Kerry to not necessarily seize assets of suspected tax evaders, not necessarily shut down businesses, but rather get into some sort of negotiation with them to get them to comply. For someone who's in a tax situation today, please tell us how this has worked so far. Have you effected it? And with whom? How much money? Are we netting in more as a result of this?
We have effected it and giving it a more, probably giving tax collection a friendlier face. How are we approaching it? Is more about around taxpayer facilitation. So taxpayer facilitation means many things. Taxpayers in some instances would come to you and say, I actually know I owe, but I'm not able to pay. Let me step back a bit. So in every business transaction, as long as there's a transaction in place, there's likely to be a dispute. Any commercial engagement. So in our case then, we're talking about taxpayer dispute resolution, where taxpayers we would tell the taxpayer, you owe us this. They would say, no, we don't owe this, we owe the other. So what have we done in the first instance? To encourage our taxpayers, instead of all of us rushing to the tax appeals tribunal or going through the appeal process, High Court, Court of Appeal, etc., why can't we sit around the table and have a conversation? So where matters are gray, we've actually facilitated our taxpayers. You know, I always say when it's black and white, for example, a taxpayer would not come to me if tax is 16% and say, I'm going to pay 14. No. There are instances where the tax provisions or tax application can be gray. So around a table and engaging on alternative dispute resolution, what can we do? Now, again, on that ADR, we call it ADR, last year we resolved 1,038 tax disputes. So that netted in just about 15.2 billion. So that is one aspect of it. Again, giving it a friendly face, welcoming you to the table. Mm-hmm. The other one is where a taxpayer actually admits to owing tax, but again, not able to pay in a lump sum. We have given payment plans. What we, however, encourage our taxpayers to do is that as we give you a payment plan, as a sign of goodwill, try as best as you can then to sustain the payment plan. Because what that means is that when you default, then the tendency is to call it all up. So yes, not necessarily shutting you down, but even engaging you on what else can we do to facilitate you so that we'd rather have that little trickling in than nothing at all.
But yet, MSMEs feel that that's not the way it happens for them, that there's a lot more grace, perhaps, that is given to the larger taxpayers. But for those in the MSME sector, the demands are quick, they are swift. You know, I know of many businesses that have had their accounts frozen for that, and it would be, you know, a delay, which is, I think you're supposed to file by the 20th. You have a delay already. KRA within a week is giving you penalties. This is what you have to pay. So for some, they say, look, this is all well and good for the larger taxpayers. You know, we've seen disputes, some of which we probably can't discuss because they're in court, but disputes where, you know, KRA sits down with the corporation and says, okay, so this is and it's billions of shillings, and they say, okay, we promise to pay, and then they don't pay, and then KRA is back there, and but that same grace is not extended to smaller business owners.
I appreciate that, actually, and what we have done, and that's why when I give the statistics of their constitution versus their contribution, and we actually think they can do, MSMEs can do much more. So what we have done as KRA, we have purposed to go out and have specific engagements with MSMEs. We may not have done much, but we are very alive to the fact that we can do much more for MSMEs. And you see, when MSMEs grow, it means then there's potential for more revenue. A couple of months back, we deliberately opened just about 20 MSME desks across the country. We intend to build up on that. What then that means is that regardless of where you are, if you can access a carer office, a Huduma center, anywhere, then we are willing to talk and engage with you as an MSME, so that those dealing with LTO, the large taxpayers, those dealing with the medium taxpayers can continue with their practices as they are, but more focus on MSMEs. And we always engage them to bring actually forward feedback. What can we do differently? What can we do better for them? So I will not run away from that sentiment.
Here's Babu Michael saying businesses in this country literally fear KRA. When they hear that the officials are visiting their premises, they may even close for the whole day. Even if they may have complied to most of the KRA regulations, can KRA be positively viewed? Look, and that is just one of many that I could read that would then show you so you can open centers and whatnot, but I think the fear for them is the interaction, even perhaps at those centers, is not a friendly one.
We do hope to up our game on that, Yvonne. That is a historical issue. Doesn't mean that it has gone away. And like I said earlier, I truly agree that we can actually do more as far as putting a friendly face to our activities and our interactions is concerned. And our focus this time actually is on MSMEs. What we can do better, I do appreciate actually the feedback. We get it every time. We don't look at it negatively. We actually look at it as objective feedback that is meant to make us grow and provide better service delivery.
Okay, I want us to take a look at some feedback. We've been asking our viewers to send in questions. I guess Mr. Big Data, who asks what has KRA done to make tax systems and administration simple to the taxpayers. MSMEs are struggling to understand the taxes. I believe you've answered that already with the centers that you're opening to get closer to them. Do we have some more of those questions? There we go. Justina Wamai. And you can see it as well, Rispah. VAT accrues a penalty of 10,000 per month for non-filing. For someone who got the penalties but has never transacted, why is it difficult to get a waiver? Also, why is KRA punishing unemployed youth to pay penalties, yet they never transacted at the time?
Good question to Justina Wamai. Actually, I meant to answer something, just touching on the same about the penalties. You see, it is not KRA imposing the penalties. The penalties are in law, and penalties are meant to deter certain behavior such that then it improves on compliance, on-time payment, on-time filing. Now, going back to the specific question asked, you see, when a tax is due, say, for example, by the 9th, if you're talking PAYE or if you're talking agency taxes that are due by the 20th, if you're to pay any minute past midnight, the system is wired in such a way that it will automatically apply that penalty. So it's not someone sitting behind a system or rather putting that penalty. Now, punishing unemployed youth, when you are signing up, we have had challenges where many people were probably applying for a PIN for various reasons. Probably right now, since the 2015 Tax Procedures Act, you could get a PIN to open a bank account or for whatever, transact in land, anything. So at that point, some would actually go to a cyber. And at the cyber, you'd be charged a fee to open an account, log into iTax, register for a PIN, etc. And at that point, then you're given a tax obligation. So at that point, it might not be known to you that once you have a tax obligation, there are certain expectations. There's expectations that come with it. For example, filing regularly, even if you're filing a nil return, but then you need to file because the law is clear. Now, that would have been different, for example, if you're dealing with a service center or a MSMEs desk or etc. So this is a problem we are looking into. There is an opportunity. There has been an opportunity actually of applying for a waiver, and we have cases where people have applied, but when you apply for a waiver, again, it is not manual. Just a little education in this regard is that you apply in the system stating reasons why you think you actually deserve that waiver. That is done very deliberately so that anybody reviewing that, an independent person, looking at the process that a KRA staff has undergone to grant you that waiver, or the taxpayer, then the reasons for you applying for that waiver, they are legit. And as such, then we've actually had quite a number of waivers waived.
Okay, is there a way to make the process a little easier for the applications of the waiver?
It is actually,
or to make it more efficient and easier? I guess maybe that's what Justina
It is actually very easy. Once you log into iTax, in fact, there's actually a drop-down somewhere you say, apply for waiver. But then, more often that you'll find people say, apply and submit. So you see it comes blank. How do you know, why do you want a waiver? Yeah. Some justification, because even the law says actually clearly that someone needs to create some justification as to why they apply for that waiver. And some have actually demonstrated, I've not been transacting, I applied when I was a high school student for whatever reason, and waivers have been granted.
Okay, we'll go back to a few more questions. There was something you had talked about with respect to, you know, when you're setting up the tax regime in a country, is you compare with what's happening in the region. You want to benchmark what's happening in the East African region, on the continent. So tell us about that decision making. So you look at the other countries in the region, and you know, as you try to benchmark, how do you then come to the final decision?
Now, the setting up of tax rates is not just a KRA affair. There are very many stakeholders involved, and even our taxpayers through various channels. So through different business member organizations, they would always make a submissions year in, year out. So we look at various things, so submissions made, and submissions would always come with justifications. Why it should be 30, why it should be 35, etc., etc. So it's not just about looking at the region, because you see sometimes also when you look at the region, you may be lost because you also need to compare the economy. You need to be at par. Yeah. So there's many other things that you look at. Now, some of the challenges we've actually been given are like when you're looking at agency taxes, for example, our economy is much larger compared to maybe the smaller East Africa region. But then you have others collecting more. So again, it comes back to the issue of efficiencies and what else can be done. So tax setting of rates is not just a KRA affair. We may participate, but more importantly, this is a bigger conversation, both with our parent ministry, both with our leaders, as you've seen various conversations on the floor of Parliament, but KRA largely implements.
Because many would say when you compare us, like you've said, with other countries in the region which may have smaller economies or larger economies, and also their internal situations are a lot different. Even the way their politics is structured is probably a lot more different than the way ours is. So there's, quite a number of issues. For instance, there are certain countries in the region that have a number of exemptions, for instance, on capital gains tax. In Rwanda, I believe they have reduced PAYE.
Again, give and take, Yvonne. So if you look at Uganda and Tanzania, for example, when you look at the corporation tax, we are at par, 30%. Does that mean the economy is the same? No. Can we collect more from Kenya? Yes. Should we go that direction? Debatable. Yeah. So we look at different taxes. What is it? Whether you're looking at sin tax, whether you're looking at corporation tax, whether you're looking at agency taxes. Again, not like for like, but then what also works for our economy, what can be sustained by our economy.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've heard from KRA is an attempt to now access our records a little more, to be able to see, who's transacting what, when, and how. Talk to us about that.
Even maybe the question I'll be asking is what is being hidden. But anyway, on a light note.
But then there's also the question of data protection and privacy.
Yes, right? There's that. Yeah. But then there's also the civic duty of what you owe the country.
So what information does KRA access from me on a day-to-day basis? What do you have access to?
Our law, our act allows us to access, say, for example, your bank statement. But in that instance, like now, for example, we are not integrated with the banks, because what we'd expect is that at a point then when we are integrated, some of these taxes will flow through, and we don't have then to ask if you want to give us a statement or ask the bank. Certain countries, like say, for example, South Africa, might have been slightly ahead of us, but some of these countries have actually automated, and it's not really a matter of concern. I do appreciate that with every change, there will always be that shift of what do they want. So as it is now, we are not integrated, but then from where we sit now, you need to give us then a reason. Maybe when you look at your activities, let me give you an example. Yvonne. You are importing large goods, high-end vehicles, etc. But then on this other side, and remember when you're importing, it's coming through our points of entry.
Yes.
So it means we can see it from the customs side. But then when you look at it from the domestic tax side, everyone is filing a nil return. That gives us a reason to look further. So even the law actually gives us that comfort and the basis of looking into that, you see, with justification. What is it that we are looking for?
And how much further do you look?
As much as information that we can access.
Such as?
Like I said, bank statements.
And?
Probably more will come even with integration.
What's the more?
Kenyans are transacting on mobiles.
Are you checking M-Pesa records?
Not yet.
Do you want
to? Not. You see, what we don't want access to your private information. I think it's important to separate that too. Yeah, because what we are looking at is financial transactions. That's what we are limiting ourselves.
But that's what M-Pesa is. So
yes, that's what M-Pesa is.
You will look through all the transactions, personal and otherwise.
Yes, but you see now, when you're looking at M-Pesa, before you get to the day-to-day of the transfers, there are the pay bills, there are the till numbers. All this, even with, and you know, not necessarily focusing on M-Pesa, I would talk about telcos. I think it's easier, it's better when we talk about telcos.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about telcos, and maybe to give an example, of course, now if I give an example, pay bills and tills, it means a lot of financial transactions are being carried out using these platforms. Comes back to the earlier point I said, what can we do more? Where else can we check to ease the burden on those already paying taxes? So if we go that direction, then you'll hear the noise. But then on this other side, there is the noise of those ones who say, you keep coming back to me, yet I know you can actually do more. So it's a very delicate balance, and the work has to be done.
All right. Social media.
Sorry?
Are you checking social media posts? Does that help you to figure out whether there is compliance with tax payments?
Yes, we do. We do. And again, going back earlier to the earlier point I said, we have a team that also looks at, we collect also taxes based on intelligence. Intelligence can be collected from anywhere. It can be social media, it can be what you post, it can be on publications that you have. So yes, we look anywhere and everywhere where we can access information.
Okay. How are you able to tell, you know, for lack of a better word, social media is, you know, we know what it is. It's, you know, I could go to a showroom down the road, posed by a vehicle. Yes. And what's the word, what's the phrase we say? Ni God manze. God is good. How are you able to tell what's real and what's not?
How are we able to tell? From the face of it, you may not be able to. But then what that means is it's up to us, as opposed to just saying Yvonne has gone down the road to the Toyota showroom and done a selfie and saying living large, or
God's been good.
Yes, God's
Work
been
hard,
good.
play hard.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're in Dubai or the Maldives and you're saying Maldives manenos, you know. So
and it's just a banner behind.
Yes. Or you've gone to the airport departures and you take a selfie, you know. So all that is there, and we appreciate, and especially looking at our youngsters. I mean, it's a feel-good thing, so it's fine. But then KRA will not base any assessment on that. It means we need to do a little bit of groundwork. You see, it depends. You probably have, you've taken a selfie, it has a number plate, a vehicle with a number plate on it, probably as doing checks and TSA. Everywhere else, you'd find that vehicle is nowhere near you. So it's not just about saying selfies, Maldives maneno, Dubai manenos, and saying we are slamming you with 20% or 30%. No, we do a little bit of groundwork to get to that. Okay.
I want to take, we have a couple more questions. Let's take some of those. Here's one from Yempat CBO. Please find out from the KRA Commissioner, Rispah Simiyu, the plan they have for interns at KRA. They've never been absorbed, retained, or given priority during any hiring. It is constitutional role of the government of Kenya to provide access to employment for the youth.
Thank you, Yempat CBO.
Yeah.
One, I wish to correct that narrative that they have never been absorbed, because that's not correct. Interns have been absorbed at different levels. But we also appreciate then what is the intention of having interns in every institution, not just KRA. Because then when you have interns, you have them maybe for 1 year, you train them on the job training, they probably move on to something else as you onboard others. So you might not have that capacity to onboard all or to absorb all of them. But in some instances, yes, we have actually absorbed. Like every other government institutions, and again, government institution, and again, an issue that we've been challenged by His Excellency the President, is that to have more interns coming through the pipeline, but even as they move on, they have to create space for others. So we do absorb in the first instance, and of course also depends on funding and whether you're able to absorb them. But yes, I think it's important to just say the word never is not quite correct. We have absorbed in some instances.
Okay, here's another one from Sankale Brown. I'm a Kenyan, I work abroad, I pay tax to that country when I get my paycheck. Also, I'm told to pay tax here at home. Is this really right? Please explain so I can understand.
Thank you, Sankale Brown. When you're paying your taxes as a Kenyan, our tax regime is based on self-assessment. I think that's a starting point. And secondly, is based on source. So income accrued or derived in Kenya. Now, you take it a step further. For a Kenyan, whether living abroad, but you're a Kenyan and you're a resident then for tax purposes, the expectation is that then you will file your returns and pay taxes here, yeah? So what then has the country done, or what does the legislation do? There are instances where, a number of them, where we have double tax agreements with other countries. And so as you're comparing, or rather computing your taxes or filing your return here as a resident, then you're able to actually take that relief of the tax paid elsewhere. Yeah? So that is one. Where we don't have double tax agreements, it's more of a unilateral tax relief that we acknowledge the fact that, yes, you're here, you're filing your returns, you're paying your taxes, but then there is that expense that you need to take into consideration while you're paying your returns. So as far as the Kenyan is concerned, there's that aspect of double tax agreements or the unilateral tax relief that then gives you relief as a Kenyan.
Let's see, we have some more? Yes. Eston Quach, ask Madam CG whether tax holidays and tax reliefs for innovative enterprises also exist in Kenya, or do they only exist in the movies?
Thank you, Eston Quach. Tax holidays do exist in Kenya, and tax reliefs, but what I would also say is that this also accounts for a bigger part of our tax expenditure. I think it is a noble thing when it is applied appropriately and put to good use to nurture businesses as they grow, to encourage investors. But we've seen instances, truth be told, where there is a tax holiday, it's running for 5-10 years, and just at the tail end of it, someone else reincarnates, clones and ends up in something else and then again applies. So yes, they are there, but I think they can be put to good use.
All right, here's another one from Mr. Big Data. He calls himself Albo Jordi.
Yep.
What was the selection criteria for the new Revenue Service Assistant, and who were selected on the posts you advertised in May? Were successful applicants notified, or do they continue waiting?
Okay, like 2 or 3 questions in one. So for one, selection criteria, there are 3 critical things that you must have done. One, you have applied. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't give you a job that you haven't applied for. 2, you are between the age of 18 and 35, meaning anything below, of course, we will not pick. Anything above, then we're trying to, we had to set the criteria. And thirdly, you have a minimum grade of D+. So basically, D+ and above. So that was the core, what I would call the core criteria. What then happened after that, if you meet that, you were subjected to an online assessment test. And based on the online assessment test, we were able to select successful applicants. What I would wish to shed light on this particular process is that it's a new one of its kind, in the sense that this is a concept that we have borrowed largely from Italy. And Italy, they call it tax police loosely. But we didn't want to call it tax police, and that's why we call it revenue service assistance. And what they're supposed to do is encourage compliance and encourage, again, deterrence from non-compliance. So these are people who will be out there, clearly marked, clearly well-dressed, that you can spot them from far, as they help us to enforce largely VAT and excise duty in the process. So yes, those who are successful were notified. As it is, they are undergoing training. All right.
With this particular role, why do you think there is a bit of disquiet around how the process was conducted? There's that question. I've seen a similar one from Kasili Andrew, who just says, we heard that the new recruits are currently doing military training somewhere. What happened? Is there transparency? The same issue has been raised by David Muthuri, who says, Mulinyamaza kazi ya revenue service assistance, surely. So, and I've seen this quite a bit on social media with this particular role. Why do you think there was so much disquiet about recruitment of this particular role? Was it that it was not done properly, or that there was no proper communication to those who weren't successful? Because I can assure you there's many more tweets about this specific role.
Yvonne, it's interesting, and we were also taken aback at why it attracted such how it was that attractive. And we do appreciate that there are many youngsters out there who want jobs. The jobs were only limited to a certain number. And when you put it out there, it is system-based. Very many people will apply. But you have to find a way to arrive at a certain number. So there were two things. One, those ones who felt like I met the criteria, but then you have over 120,000 applicants, and you just want just slightly over 1,000. So you can imagine what percentage, 10%? So that disquiet was likely to come up. Secondly, you've made reference to the military training. It's not per se military training. So what we have done, and going back to the concept as it is, a concept that we've borrowed from Italy, this training, what we are trying to do as KRA is to inculcate the right discipline and attitude in how we go about our services. Again, going back to the same thing, you try and do something differently, you'd still, raise certain concerns. So this team is going to carry out enforcement activities. Now, yes, there is an aspect of physical health, physical fitness, because this is a team that will largely be out there on the street to enforce taxes, to deter non-compliance. Now, it is not purely, even the training that they're undergoing, it's just about 2 months of training. It's not purely military training, as it been, because what we have done, we have combined it with tax training. We have had certain concerns in the past where we have onboarded staff and they have not probably been appropriately trained. They appear before you are another taxpayer. They're making demands of probably taxes they're not understanding. So what we're doing is going back to the basics. What do we need to do differently? How can we then build capacity? Now, in this particular team, you can imagine someone on the street asking you whether you've paid VAT or whether you've been onboarded on e-Teams, and they have no clue even what e-Teams is about or what you're doing about it. So, one, the enforcement aspect, and two, the imparting tax knowledge.
Okay. Mark Luther on Twitter says, KRA deconsolidation has left small businesses without stocks for 5 weeks, with a drastic increase in taxes and no stocks. How do they expect these businesses to survive?
Thank you, Luther. The issue around deconsolidation is around customs. It's actually around imports. And what we have seen is that whereas we are running a very tight rope of balancing trade facilitation versus people paying the appropriate and fair share of taxes, we have noted that even in the consolidation, there's a lot of under-declaration. And this I say with a lot of sadness, because when you're trying to then facilitate trade and such, then ensure that the stocks keep coming, when the consolidation is done, then certain things are under-declared, and by under-declared, it means then they pay less taxes. So take an example. That certain goods should be charged, general goods should be charged if they're coming through our airports at about 270 shillings per kilo. Now, strictly speaking and looking at customs practices, when you import a box of pens, a phone, you should be charged based on the value of the pens or the value of that phone. Now, again, going back to that balance, are we going to charge every pen, or how can we then facilitate trade that businesses continue to run, but then largely relying and banking on the consolidators to make full declaration? So what we've had is that where instances where taxpayers then should pay 270 shillings per kg on general goods, we then isolate excisable goods which would attract a different tax. We then isolate, smartphones, and we treat those differently, say, from what we call now feature phones that are not smartphones, or high-end TVs, or someone will bring in a very high-end TV or a phone. Let me just use this phone as an example. You'll bring in an iPhone 14 Pro Max, but you declare it as a Nokia, the Nokia that goes to about 2,000, 2,500. Certainly, you want taxes between those two are worlds apart. So the reason why we are walking this rope is even as we're trying to encourage our consolidators, because it's not about the end user. Luther sounds like the end user because he's talking about the tail end.
Yes.
Yeah? But it's more the in-between, encouraging our consolidators. You see, if you then declare appropriately and the valuation is done in the right manner, then we will not necessarily have to be called in time and again to do the 100% verification, and then goods and stocks will keep coming as they should.
So how do you do this without affecting Mark Luther? Because all Mark wants is he's imported his goods, he needs those goods released, he needs to make a sale. All of that, which then is a nice circle, comes back to he's able to pay his taxes. So whilst what you're saying, may have a point in terms of making sure that we're paying the right taxes for the right amount, there is somebody at the tail end who's saying all of this that you're trying to do is inconveniencing me, because somebody waiting for their stocks for 5 weeks, would obviously impact their business.
True, Yvonne. But I would also want to demystify this whole issue of Kerry being the one inconveniencing Luther. While appreciating that, yes, he has no stock, but there is someone in between Luther and Kerry. That person is the consolidator. All we are telling the consolidator is that if you've brought Luther's feature phones, or if you've brought Luther's garments, can you just declare them, pay them 270 shillings per kilo if they've come through the airport, and quickly process Luther's items? Now, where you've brought these other features, smartphone, again, back to the example of the smartphone, declare it as a smartphone, pay the appropriate share of taxes, and clear it. Now, this is a matter in the public domain, probably not where you should, but it's important for me to shed some light, is that when we realized the gross gross undervaluation, misdeclaration, of the value of the goods, we then opted to do 100% verification. And what we did is that just put a pause to the clearance of these goods and say, if you actually have declared rightly, we will quickly process you. And we did that. Because what we did then, we shifted extra hands to facilitate that so that there's no delay. However, what happens, I think, with some of our partners, they opted not to come for the verification process. That is what caused a delay. So we are present saying, if you've actually declared what you've rightly declared what you brought, then show up and we can verify, and off you go.
Okay.
So that's purely it.
All right. This is a question with regards to, the sort of service delivery and the face of KRA. So we hear of plans to rebrand the Kenya Revenue Authority to the Kenya Revenue Service. And we understand that it's going to cost the taxpayer 2.7 billion shillings. Why?
Let me say that probably the way it was reported, it was, I would say, probably slightly taken out of context. Why am I saying that? Because rebranding is a journey. It's not about dropping the A and replacing it with an S. Rebranding is a journey. Getting out there, engaging you, probably even getting some facilities, bringing whether it's MSMEs or a certain industry or a certain group of people to sit and talk to them. So rebranding is a journey. So it's not just about the swap. So in all this, then of course, then there will be the rebranding in terms of how we are called, how we are branded, how our offices look like. So it's more of the infrastructure and what then we need to do for our taxpayers as we change, or not change, as we improve then who we are and how we deliver our services and improve service delivery. So when that figure is put there, it almost looks like replacing the A with the S costs 2 billion. But I think it is important for Kenyans to appreciate that it's a process. And there are many small things, there's a matrix, there are very many other things that need to be done so that we are not just called KRS for the sake of being called KRS, but you actually feel that we are no longer just an authority that is out there to collect taxes, but we are also bringing services closer to the people.
All right, so allow me to ask this then. You can understand why Kenyans would be wary about, it's not 10 shillings, it's not 1,000, it's 1 billion, 2, close to 3. Are you not able to rebrand the way you deal with your customers without spending 2.7 billion in an economy that is really tight, with the obligations that we have with debt? With average Kenyans who are saying, well, hey, look, I'm struggling to pay you the taxes, and you're paying you're incurring 2.7 billion on what you call, a process, which is engaging better with the consumer. Are you not able, Rispah, to engage better with the consumer just by attitude changes on the part of staff, on the part of better service delivery, without spending 2.7 billion shillings? Because better service delivery is what you owe Kenyans anyway.
True.
You don't need to rebrand. You don't need 2.7 billion shillings. Can't you just serve us better without charging us for it 2.7 billion shillings? In any case, do you even want to change the infrastructure? We're okay with KRA. Call it what you want. Have whatever logo you want. Just serve us better.
There's a lot of give and take in that regard. Yes. Again, even as we are asking for certain spend in certain aspects, it's also upon us then to see what else can we cut back on. So going back again to my point earlier that 2 billion, as you've actually rightly said, and Kenyan would look at it, why 2 billion to do X? But for me, I would look at it differently. A taxpayer is telling me that when you go virtual, I don't understand you better. But when you put me in a hotel, and sometimes I'd even ask, don't you have even small, just as small as a by the way example. So for me, focus should not be on the 2 billion, should be on the value then that needs to come out of it. And I'll go back again to the same point that it is a journey. It is not just about KRA inward looking, because you can replace the A with an S and we still remain who Kenyans perceive us to be. So we will not have achieved the expected outcome. But then it is more outward looking of service. What else can we do? Right now, we are partnering again, even with the each citizen, taking again services closer to the people? Does that entail matters system enhancement? What does it mean? So it's not just about a 2 billion. It's basically, I think the better precision would be, even as it's broken down, what exactly is the outcome? And it's not a year, it's over a period of time. So
somebody here asks on that question, Maruwini, do you need to rebrand? You need to overhaul yourselves. What will change the way we perceive them? Changing colors, names won't change the way they deal with Kenyans. I mean, you know, we're in an austerity, phase. Yeah. Everybody's cutting back. Yeah. We're hoping government can cut back. And again, the question of just serve Kenyans as you should.
Yes, indeed. Service delivery and service to Kenyans is their right. Yeah, at no cost. So it's what they're entitled to, is what we should give. Now, I think just telling Maruwini is that even when it comes to change of name or change of approach or what we do, even as we rebrand, not about the colors, again, not about the letters, but what else does... You see, Maru is sitting in a place where she's saying, just rebrand and serve us better. Someone else is saying, can you, in this particular county, we don't have an office. Bring the services closer to us. In this particular area, we need more staff. Bring services closer to the people. We've talked about 20 MSMEs desk. Are they enough? Certainly far from being enough. What more then can we do to get closer? So it's not just, and I think I want us to shift from, it's not just about the name, it's the bigger framework, the bigger picture of what else comes along with the name, such that even as I appear before you, then you don't feel the authority, you feel the service. Mm.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? Oh my gosh, yes. How many can we take? Rispah is here way past her bedtime now. You've answered most of those questions. So look, there's more feedback. We can read that after. I want to give you the opportunity for closing remarks now.
Thank you, Yvonne, and basically to the many Kenyans that have been watching Far and Beyond. First, I want to really thank Kenyans, those paying their fair share of taxes, for their patriotism, for their living up to their civic duty of paying taxes. As I said earlier, it may not be an easy brand, easy product, but it has to be done because at the end of it all, we are the backbone of the economy. We need to pay these taxes. Also appreciating, of course, my staff at KRA, for those who go beyond, Far and Beyond, also to do what is expected of them to ensure then that the government delivers on its agenda. As we are doing this, and I think this is also my call to the media, that as we continue having these conversations, we are very happy actually to reach out to whether it's financial journalists and beyond, so that then we can have the appropriate and the right reporting, you know, just probably even to leave a day and to maybe walk through a process on what it is that we do. But again, just to say much appreciation to the many Kenyans who have stepped up, to the feedback that we receive. We don't take it for granted, and we look forward actually to receiving more, even as we walk this journey of trying to mobilize the much needed revenue for our country.
Thank you indeed for that. Thank you very much indeed, Rispah Simiyu, the Acting Commissioner General of KRA, on a host of issues this evening. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your